I won't do introductions actually, because you already know who all these guys are, I think. I would like to start going back to the discussion about meaning making friction. I think it's a really important one. There is so much tension around this at the moment, particularly considering how we talk about AI and this move to sort of extreme efficiency. And frictionlessness, of course, can be very useful, but we know that convenience has potentially detrimental, even damaging ramifications. So Emma, if I could just start with you, is there a risk of frictionless experiences that we could actually kind of aid and vet the depth of curiosity, of discovery? Could we even breed the kind of inertia that will mean our brains and our social lives will start to sort of slowly atrophy? And if so, that was quite dramatic. Sorry, not to be too much of a Debbie Downer with the first question. But if so, is that even more problematic for young people who are kind of still developing all those skills?
Wow. Yes, to the first part, I think definitely. The thing with curiosity is that, it's dependent on tension, and we've designed tension out of our life in the name of convenience. And I think, this is a societal thing, because we've gotten so used to getting what we want that we've forgotten how to want well. Because when everything's instant, like, answers, connection, entertainment even, then there's no time for your mind to wander, there's no time to build resilience, there's no time to just get bored, which, from today's presentation we've understood how important that actually is.
When you say want well, do you mean in terms of kind of delayed gratification?
Yes, exactly that. Because you need that sense of delayed gratification for it to sort of build in some kind of meaning.
Yeah.
Because we've been conditioned into understanding that speed is super important, and it's really difficult now to value anything that isn't immediately gratifying.
Yeah.
So it's just that understanding of needing to sort of slow down.
Because otherwise we just want the next thing and the next thing.
Exactly. And that's, convenience has its use. Like, wouldn't be here without it. Even today I wouldn't be here without it. But there is a trade-off between sort of efficiency and depth. Access and attention even. And I think, in my mind, convenience needs a bit of a rebrand. It needs to be sort of ease, with intention as opposed to ease at any cost. And in terms of it affecting young people, I do think it has such a huge impact on young people, but I actually think the bigger problem is the elderly, 65 years and up, because they are deeply online, they're online. And they're online.
Older people.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think it's a myth? So we talk about the very online for young people a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think older people are actually more online than younger people now. They're spending more time on their devices, more of their waking hours on devices.
Because they've retired.
Because they're retired, they're lonely. There's not much else to do, so you're on a device, and you're on there without any sort of guardrails. You don't have an adult saying get off your phone. You don't have to go to school where your phone is banned for like 6 to 8 hours of the day. So you're on there, online, deeply, without really having much in terms of digital literacy.
Yeah.
And that to me is super important and really dangerous, because actually the elderly are way more susceptible to misinformation, AI scams, all of that kind of stuff. And then they take all of that to be true, and then they go vote.
Yeah.
So they're shaping policy and influencing public opinion based on this information that they've been targeted with. And to me, that's way more dangerous, because yes, the young will lose curiosity, they'll lose patience, they'll lose tolerance, but the old or the elderly will lose discernment. And I think that has far more implications for society as a whole.
That's super fascinating. Not something I really considered. It seems quite the antithesis of how we all discuss this. Jess, to bring you into this, talking about that idea of culture and how sort of frictionlessness or kind of making more meaning, making friction could incubate more positive society. Do you think there's a risk that we're being conditioned to value with this frictionlessness, an outcome, and pretty much any outcome, and ideally the quicker it's achieved, the better? Do you think that actually we should be thinking in terms of well-being, of creating, going back to ensuring that we don't have so many hacks, we appreciate the journey rather than just the outcome?
Yeah, I think the commoditization of everything and capitalism ultimately is the challenge behind all of this, right? It's a lot easier to sell a mindfulness app for £100 a year than it is to tell somebody to go and touch grass or go for a walk without your phone. You know, we've effectively rebranded boredom, right? It's now mindfulness. You know, that was boredom. And yes, we're marketers, we've all got products to sell. But I think positioning those products within what matters, and you know, I think it was Socrates says there's a barrenness to busyness.
Yeah.
And it's so true, because we are speeding up our lives in this productivity. Apparently, the average person spends their life is 8 to 10% faster than it used to be, because we're consuming more information in a week than our grandparents would in a whole year. And to your point, it's not just about children. You know, I was looking at my laptop yesterday, I had 73 open tabs because I can't finish a PDF report anymore. Mm. You know, I skip between things, and then I'll check my phone because I've just done a post on LinkedIn and I want to see what's happening there and here and there. And then the class WhatsApp group goes. You know, it's constant, this multitasking, and it is exhausting because it's the context shifting that means that we can't go deep. And obviously, if we as adults are susceptible to that, when many of us grew up in an era where this wasn't the case, then, you know, firstly, we need to address our own habits and addictions, and then secondly, we need to think about how these brains that are still developing are being trained in such a manner that they will always struggle with depth. That's why I refer to it as the lobotomization of a generation.
Yeah.
Because it's a muscle, and if it's not, if you don't go deep and you don't stretch it, you'll never recover or never gain that capacity. And the world that these children are moving into is going to be so different. The skills they need are resilience and adaptability and to think on their feet. And those are precisely the skills that we're not training them in through their content diet.
Mindfulness, obviously, there's clearly a very cynical aspect to this. You know, as you say, everything can be commoditized. But I'm sure there will be people in this audience, we think about this a lot ourselves, that there are positive aspects to that. There are very well-intentioned people that are saying, okay, how do we get that, you know, sense of friction, that mindfulness, that thinking about process, we're not just trying to get the quickest outcome, the quickest hack. You know, if we think about the world that you're working in at the moment, this idea of the digital balance economy, where we're getting this, you know, equilibrium between those two things. What is your advice? Because I think, you know, as we said, it's vital for connecting to all generations, but particularly younger generations who are re-evaluating this relationship, but they don't often know how to disentangle themselves from the world. So in terms of these things that we need to give younger people particularly, what advice would you give to brands about how you reinstate these connections and get these skills, to get them whizzed up again?
Well, I think Tess did that brilliantly. By the way, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Can I have it? It's all my talking points. There's two ways that we can look at this from a brand perspective. One is there is absolutely a CSR agenda here that, you know, needs to be embraced, because this is hugely problematic. You know, so many polarization, loneliness, distraction, anxiety, sleep deprivation, you know, all of these trends across society that affect our staff, if we look at it as companies, and ourselves and our consumers. So CSR, but I think much more optimistically, opportunity. You can see what young people are saying. They're the ones driving this growing, nascent digital defiance movement. They're voting with their feet. You know, Gen Z is telling the government that they want social media banned for Gen A. You know, 53% are saying they support a social media ban for under 16-year-olds because they have this sense that they lost their childhood to this. That is ripe for stoking and monetizing, if we're being cynical.
Yeah.
You know, so the sorts of brands that are doing this incredibly well are Polaroid, you know, for example, who did this beautiful posting campaign that lit up New York that said, you know, AI can't help you feel the sand between your toes. Mm-hmm. You know, nobody's going to, you know, wish they scrolled more on their deathbed. You know, it just hit a nerve and got so talked about. Heineken is another one, you know, social off social they did, where they took the mickey out of influencer culture. There's tumbleweed going down the street as the guy's going, is it cake or is it fake?
Yeah.
Nothing. Because everybody's in the pub, you know, that's social, right? We're reclaiming, and that generation is reclaiming it, so much so that Gary Vee has proclaimed 2026 the trend to be unplugging.
Yeah.
So, you know, this doesn't need to be dark doom-mongering narrative. It can absolutely be a positive embrace of IRL. You know, let's use their vernacular within our messaging and encourage these breaks and boundaries. It's all to play for.
It's interesting that you mentioned Heineken, actually, because I literally edited a report yesterday where we talk about Heineken had done a project in Seoul where they've reclaimed rooftops. And it's really interesting. The reason they were doing it in Seoul is because they had statistics about kind of the urban loneliness that were global, but in Seoul they were talking about one of the big problems was this idea of a kind of productivity first culture that people were really struggling with. So this idea that all the time you should be kind of optimizing yourself in a way which means that you never get to boredom and become something you'd be probably quite fearful of, actually. So we talk about unplugging a bit, but Annie, I'd like to bring you in here because I'd like to talk about this idea of force-based engagement, which is, as Tess said, a really big theme that us, the Stylus and I look ahead. I've written about it, you've done a brilliant video on it. Can you talk a bit about that? Because I do think there's an important link to talk about the power there of fandoms and where fandoms then unplug.
Yes, I think I absolutely agree about it, that us being at an inflection point, but I want to be quite pragmatic about where we are, and the genie is not going back in the bottle. Online lives are real lives, but it's where we live. So we need to find this bit balance. We need to find something that promotes the best stuff of our online lives and brings it into the real world. And this is this idea of fourth spaces. So passions that you discover online, because these are incredible places to discover things you love. Fandom has exploded in the past 10 years because of our social media environments. But how do we take that passion and turn it into an IRL environment where we can add spontaneity, or we can add friction, or we can add creativity in different kind of non-toxic environments? And Tess mentioned it, but my favourite probably is how BookTok has fueled this rise in book clubs. Because book clubs are essentially the comment section of BookTok videos, but we've added conversations that you might not feel safe to have on TikTok, or adding a social element that just doesn't exist when you're siloed in your atomized digital experiences. I think as well, we talk a lot about off-feed pop culture, and I'm quite deliberate about saying off-feed rather than offline, because yes, it's very damaging to just be engaged in the mindless scroll, just to be passively consuming, but there's ways of injecting stuff into those online experiences that mean that you can inject the physical, the tangible, whether it's print culture, whether it's knowledge maxing, that create this balance of both of those things, rather than what I think can be quite a punishing idea of you have to log off, otherwise your life is going to be terrible. I think we need to find
Do you
balance.
think the kind of pushing of logging off fully is almost like it kind of spurs?
It's another version of regulation, it's another
Yeah.
version of sort of toxic, you have to do this, otherwise your wellness is moot. I also think that we need to be aware, because of where we've got to, that there are 15-year-olds whose entire friendship groups live on Discord, and if we tell them to log off, they are suddenly quite isolated. So how do we protect what they have found and discovered and nurtured online, but bring it offline in a way that boosts their confidence and doesn't make them feel suddenly, without their arms and legs because they don't have their mobile devices.
So that's the brand opportunity, effectively, is to sort of, without wanting to be again too
They are.
mercenary about it, is to find those things and actually look at the spaces where
Yes.
they want support. Because there are some amazing statistics we've got on the site about actually how many fandoms would appreciate brand support.
Most
if it was done
fandoms do,
sensibly.
and Gen Z especially, which is where I often focus on this, just because they're straddling these two worlds in a way like no other generation has. They are very keen for brands to be involved here because they don't have the tools to do it themselves. Brands can be facilitators. We call force-based engagement, it's about building bridges. Brands can build those bridges. Fandoms, it's up in the 80 or 90% that want brands to be involved, who want to demonstrate how fandoms operate and want to give them opportunities to take that into their lives offline.
Even Tinder, funnily enough, mentioned there was a talk recently, really brilliant, where they were saying the reason they were starting to do kind of line clubs and book clubs and these things offline was because people wanted unpredictability, because they saw unpredictability as a sign of possibility and hope. So weirdly, the kind of the unpredictability was seen as this route to a lifeline to joy, in a way, which was interesting, as opposed to just necessity.
Yeah, absolutely. Joy also and discovery. I think we are, the endless scroll, we know we can never actually get to the end of Instagram, but we're starting to feel like we're getting close. I think people want to find stuff that they just haven't thought of.
Because of that awareness of the algorithmic, being stuck in your echo chamber, but also the sloth.
Yeah,
You're getting a lot of
absolutely.
stuff which is meaningless and you're stuck in it.
Yeah.
I'm really keen to get on to the sort of sentencing aspect and talk to you, Owen. It's brilliant to have you here. But just very quickly, because I think we might have some technology brands in the audience. Also, what are your thoughts on, as somebody that's an ultra technologist, on things like devices that are kind of staggered access devices, like the human mobile devices? Do you think that's something that people should really be thinking about or even be imperative?
I mean, we're in a fascinating limbo world now where we're inventing tech to stop tech.
Yeah.
I thought there were some lovely friction examples that you've given, like bricks that you have to tap against your phone that lock you out of your apps. I use Opal, which locks me out of social media and asks me, why do you want to go on it? I'm like, this is so weird that we're in this sort of mess of tech fighting tech.
Why Jeff shouldn't be on social media? The restraining order is now finished. That's a whole other talk.
Yeah, but there are huge opportunities. I think the most interesting and sustainable innovation that's happening is in safer tech for children. Because already this whole smartphone-free movement is out of date, because it's saying that it's dumb phones or supercomputers, and that's just not the case. There's so much innovation happening in that spectrum. My 12-year-old has a Samsung, and you'd think I should know better than giving him a smartphone, but his smartphone doesn't have anything on it except maps, calls, texts, and his GoHenry card and Wikipedia, because he's a trivia nerd. But he can't click through onto Wikipedia because it has no web browser. Yeah. And I can add things onto his device as he's capable of doing it responsibly. Children mature at different stages, right? I just don't want him to have something that he can chimp his life away on. But there are lots of different things happening, whether it's operating systems that you can apply to older phones or the full spectrum from dumb phone through to supercomputer. And that, I think, is a really fertile innovation space.
So it's kind of modular access and something that you would pay, as opposed to saying this is what 12-year-olds have, because one 12-year-old will be very different to another. Owen, I'd like to talk to you about this idea. I think it's super interesting here, talking about this brand ecosystem where we're talking a lot more now about products connecting to sort of digital world, experiences, services. So you get this crossover between cognitive and physical abilities, managing mood, regulating emotion, talking about that being a big thing. I mean, again, obviously, sometimes we don't want to try and create, play on neuroses just to kind of market things, but there are a significant amount of things which people are huge stressors at the moment, like we mentioned, eco-anxiety, political volatility, all kinds of things. So just, for you, how important is it, that idea of not just having an app, that helps you get to ScrollAware, but having the product and the app, or the let's not even say app, the digital aspect together?
Yeah, I think there's something in that, in having, you could say, a solution for different situations. So there is a digital thing you can click on if you're in a flight or a hotel room and you just want to pin that on. But then you can also have a mood spray that you can just use in the room if you really want to get off of the devices completely. And having a bit of a suite of things. So tech is not always the go-to answer to if I want to relax, if I want to chill out. It might be I just want to listen to some relaxing videos or do a breath work or whatever. But it might also be, I've been working on my laptop for 10 hours. I just want to create an intention environment where then actually I can just be spontaneous for the next hour. And I think that's what I particularly like about the mood sprays and the ambient music, and especially the sort of AI-generated ambient music suite that we have, that you just tell it to go, and then it will go. You don't have to worry about going and changing songs, or it'll all be in the sort of same palette. So then that's taken care of, and then whatever happens in the physical space is there to play out.
And how quickly, what you're describing, they sounded quite ritualistic.
Mm-hmm.
How important in terms of well-being are these, whether they're the more connected stuff like the meals, whether we're saying, this is like our kind of version of, our church, our sort of our gospel in church. But these sort of micro rituals, how important is so many rituals to the everyday person now in terms of well-being, or could it be?
I think they're everywhere. I think I'm constantly seeing marketing now saying daily rituals. How we've been talking about this for 2 years, but it's everywhere. And I think those examples of the dinners were really nice. It's something my partner and I were talking about last night. that we always just have dinner together. Like, that feels like it's actually something that's glue. It's so obvious, right? It's not like it's reinventing the wheel. People have known this as time immemorial. Sit down and have dinner with your family. But it almost, that's so easy to get lost when you've got Zoom calls and time zones and things pulling in different directions. I think the other thing that's interesting with rituals, and it's something that I also have an immersive theatre company that's based in Stockholm that we do a lot of work with. It's the intention and closing are so important. Having that sort of, okay, even if it's just 1 minute silence. I mean, we've noticed even that you can start a panel like this with 1 minute silence, and then you ask the question, and the atmosphere in the room is completely different because everybody's focused in and everybody's, okay, all that nervousness that was around, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And similarly, closing as well, taking 20 seconds. All right, think if there's 1 or 2 things that really stay with you after this. These can be done in business meetings, they can be done at dinners, they can be done music performances, and we do live music performances, but very often now we start with a sort of short guided meditation and then the instruments come in, all sorts of things like that.
From because you're a functional fragrance brand, and I think something that a lot of people struggle with is, we talk about kind of self-optimization, and people have lots of trackers and things like this, but lots of people don't really know what to do with that data.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, some of the trackers don't go that deep into kind of the more imperceptible signals. What are your thoughts on how that is going to shift?
Yeah, so it's biometrics, right? And it's a really interesting field, and my sense at the moment is it's still trying to figure its way out. That there's innovation being done, but in many cases, like you said, so what do you do with that information?
Yeah.
Is that actually useful? And something we found with others over the last few months is actually we've been redesigning our app a little bit to just simplify it and streamline it. So originally it was laid out a bit like a Spotify where you've got artists and playlists and blah, blah, blah. We go, no, let's just focus on function. So I want to feel relaxed, click relax, do relax. So almost like just trusting that the person knows what they want and click that. I think there will be, as we go on over the next few years, more of this sort of biometric being able to, for example, craft a soundscape that would be perfect. I mean, I would love, for example, if there was an AI that could sense the room, the temperature, the blood sugar of everybody in here, and then create a nice ambient sound for this. The flip side is it can very quickly get crap.
Yeah.
For every AI that's trying to look after you, there's also I noticed with a lot of the LLMs, like your ChatGPTs, they are basically affirmation machines that constantly tell you you're right and you're smart and you're brilliant.
That was such a good question. Well done for asking.
Yeah. That's why I was asking, because I think there's this sense that a lot of times people say, I feel a certain way, but I don't know what the root cause of that is. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So therefore I don't know how to get myself out of it, as opposed to just kind of saying, I want to be this.
Yeah, and maybe getting out of it is not even the right solution.
Yes,
versus sort of just having something that helps you express. Like if you feel sad, so you listen to a sad song, not to stop you feeling sad, but to sort of connect with some beautiful artist who actually can create something poetic out of that emotion.
Yeah. We're working on this kind of stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It would be just great to get a little window into what aspects of well-being do people want most at the moment, because I know that you work on everything to do with whether it's general focus, ADHD, sleep, anxiety, sexual arousal, even the capacity to help with addiction. What are the big hitters for you at the moment?
So I mean, all of that stuff is important. It's interesting. I think we're hitting on it. I think community and sort of minimalism, slowing down.
Okay.
That is what we're really noticing. And it's interesting. We spoke about this last week as well, about the frictionless experience versus sort of unplugging. Personally, I'm sensing there's a sort of desire for things to work very well and then a break from them. Rather than, my example I used it last time is, it sucks when you go to try to park your car and you've got to download some stupid, shitty app and then it doesn't work. And that is not good for your well-being. It's a frictionful experience, but I'd rather just pay the thing and get on with it, or simply paying my council tax. The app doesn't work. It's a nightmare. So the sort of designing tech, I think, that works very, very seamlessly, so the customer almost doesn't feel like they're having to use it. One of my friends, he's a design theorist with Daniel Fraga, and he's talking about ambient UX, or ambient user experience. So a user experience that's almost so in the background, you don't feel it.
Yeah. Yes, very interesting. We talked about that in kind of regards to sentient spaces as well recently. And I want to come back to this idea of harmonising health and kind of re-engineering pop culture and media, because you used a brilliant phrase when we were talking about this last week, when you said you want to disabuse people of the idea that well-being is about being zen, which very much talks to your point, Owen, about that idea that actually maybe it's not always about being feel-good, maybe it's about being given permission to sit in a difficult situation for a while. Maybe that's as good for your well-being as anything else. And what are the big emerging sweet spots, and why are they going to reach new audiences?
So yes, I do have a sort of bugbear with the onus on relaxation. I've started to call it sort of chill out orthodoxy, or the tyranny of Zen, where you can only be well if you're very relaxed, if you're de-escalated, if you're super calm. But pop culture can trigger deeper, rawer emotions and levels of catharsis, and I think this is what people want, because we're sort of short-formed well-being, right? With little hits of dopamine, often, but we can't access longer arcs of being in touch with our feelings, and this is what audiences want. They want, and they feel instinctively that entertainment can be very much part of this project. Entertainment is part of the well-being project. So the areas that I'm really interested in, we Tess talked briefly in the presentation about gaming. I think gaming is an ideal territory here, because these simulated worlds allow us they trigger feelings and then it allows us to live through them. So we are playing through these sort of test runs of things like empathy, compassion and teamwork, or the pro-social instincts. And then music, of course, is sort of pulls the same levers, I think, because it's bodily and brain, it's emotions, and it affects us physically. And these areas of neuroscience, cognitive science, about what music can do to trigger not just well-being, but our interrogation of well-being, is still really underutilised, I think.
And I think it's worth pointing out with the Coco and How to Play listening sessions, one of the interesting things is they were using music like Aphex Twin.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like the anti-Gwyneth Paltrowing of
yeah, exactly. It's sort of anti the spa level wellness culture where we're, a sound bath is sort of all you're offered. But what about getting weirder? I think people want unconventional, they want strange. What about screen therapy? Do you have to just sort of be lying in a dark room all the time? I think listening to Aphex Twin, and the idea of deep listening as well is great, because it's not just music in the background might make me feel good, but how can I push my perception of music into uncharted territory that might trigger something big and huge, and it's almost like a type of therapy. And doing that with extraordinary artists, they did Aphex Twin, they've done Brian Eno, so it's electronica, it's trance, I think tying that to music culture and the level of feeling that music culture can generate is a really nice tie-in, again, with entertainment and well-being.
It's interesting we showed the Max Richter project, which is great, but it's almost like, in some ways it's quite radical, and it's, there'll be a certain audience that will go to that, but not everybody.
Yeah.
Mainstreaming this stuff to make sure that we really hit as many people as possible with it. How, especially if you were here and you were from TV or film and you were thinking about the programming, what do you do in that situation? Something that's not more populist.
Yes, so the Max Richter thing is lovely, but it's not hugely replicable. I think what it is inspiration about, on a specific level and a sort of bigger level, inspiration of how willing to explore people are. And specifically, I think things like sleep is a really interesting area. So Netflix, they are releasing a film called Train Dreams. I think they hope it to be an Oscar contender. It's wonderful sort of meditation on the American working class, but it's also about solitude and contentment and our relationship with our own consciousness. They've partnered with Calm, which is the mental wellness app, and they've produced a soundscape. I think it's 20 minutes. It's sort of snippets from the script and the soundtrack and some narration re-engineered to help you sort of self-soothe as you start to go to sleep. And the idea that we might be exploring these themes as we're sort of getting into that slumber state is a really different, I sort of think of it as counter-programming, rather than trying to cut through in the noisy, brain-rotted waking hours. What about our times when our brain is starting to slow down and we might forge some deeper connections with the material?
It's funny, isn't it? Because the ex-CEO of Netflix is talking about saying sleep is their enemy.
Yes.
So if you read that another way,
Yes,
I think of it, that bit of sleep when you think that you're in person, not really.
I think of it less as colonising our sleep, which I agree, no. But I think more, what about our quieter moments? Where can we connect with entertainment in ways that aren't loud? I love the unhinged stuff in its place, but we can't have that all the time. We have to connect with stuff on a deeper level too.
Just what are your thoughts on that? Sort of de-wellnessing, in the most cliche terms, mindful media.
Well, it kind of depresses me that we're trying to make money out of people sleeping now. It's like, well, what can't we, what don't we need to monetize? I mean, there is no CMO for the best things in life are free, right? This is one of the great challenges. But there are ways to weave our products and services around more old-fashioned analog living, and I guess what I see is marketing opportunity in that idea of an analog renaissance, so that we're not, we're telling people it's okay not to hyper-optimize everything. I think something that Tess said really resonates with me, which is the wellness burnout.
Yeah.
I definitely get the sense that we're just over-optimizing everything. I felt this personally when, every time I take the dog out for a walk, got to play a podcast, got to imbibe some content or information. And I've stopped doing that now. And what I've realised is my own brain is processing. And, I love what you said, but we need this idea. It's really taken me off on a track of inserting minutes of silence to allow that processing time. Because your brains are smarter than you think. The back brain does a lot of that. And when I come back from a dog walk, having spent half an hour not listening to something, somehow I know exactly where to start my day when I get back at my laptop. And it's normally on the 67th tab that's still open, wherever. I think brands can be part of that narrative and associate themselves in their customers when we're caring about bringing more peace, and not everything having to be optimized. I think there's going to be some lovely value in that.
I think the stuff that you saw about that was kind of relating to sports brands and this kind of like we're calling it well rebels and that sort of all rave culture attached to it was, although it's a kind of high octane version of it and a kind of slightly unhinged version of it, the idea again, as you say, it's really to do with although they're still performance-based brands, undoubtedly, and the product is really sort of high performance, high quality stuff. It's about something that's more subversive and almost goes against that kind of longevity culture where it's like optimize at all costs so that you'll live to 120. But what if you have a really joyless life? How does that work? So really it's against that sort of perfectionism, striving attitude, which makes for a slightly joyless life. That was brilliant. I think we're probably out of time, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of audience questions. Can I ask all of you one thing about this? What would you leave brands with today to feel that you could do or focus on that would significantly boost the well-being of your fans, audiences, consumers? So because there's so much information here, what would, from each of your perspectives, be the one thing?
I would focus on the fourth space idea. I think brands facilitators of offline experiences. It's sort of inspired by online passions, but offline experiences that people are maybe struggling to establish for themselves. Brands can play a hugely supportive role here. They can also transform people's passions into something with much further reach and depth. So I'd really encourage them to go online, discover the passions, and work out how to take it offline.
Brilliant.
I guess what comes up for me, which ties in a bit with what I've been saying, and also something around sort of more authentic marketing, which we haven't really touched on, but it's a trend that I'm seeing at the moment, is really focus on delivering what you do, and then don't try and be the solution to every single problem that exists. It's like, if you're a company that makes shoes, make good shoes, and sure, make them good for people's health and wellness, but don't pretend that you're also a treatment for depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
You're a shoe brand, make good shoes, and let that be itself, and trust consumers to figure out their wellness, having nice things in their lives.
It's funny, we've talked about that with AI, we've talked about AI therapists before, and that idea of not displacing things that are good for humans. And that was the big thing that came out of our research, Annie, wasn't it? That it was saying, actually, it can be useful for a thing, but it's like, this is the one thing that it's designed to guide you through, not be your friend in your pocket, because that's not how codifying friendship it can't work in that way.
I think besides doom scrolling, we should have doom chatting.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. Emma, what about you?
I think my focus is AI and misinformation. So it's understanding how you embed discernment as a design metric within your product, within your brand. Just trying to get people off of screens, just trying to be, not necessarily off of screens actually, just trying to helps strengthen discernment as opposed to exploiting a lack of it.
So discernment as a route to sort of feeling like you're more in control and therefore more well, or is that,
Yeah, more in control.
Thank you, that's brilliant.
I'll try and make mine tactical and self-serving. The time is now, basically, to jump the chasm from our personal concern about all of this issue into the professional. People don't know how to do that. You know, everyone knows that there are profound issues here with overwhelm and distraction and anxiety, and it's all related. We need to pull that into the professional, and I guess that's exactly what I'm seeking to do with ScrollAware. So our mission is less scroll, not no scroll, a little less scroll, more soul. So it's all about balancing that, and as I said, there's both responsibility, requirements for us to do this, but equally there's opportunity. So we're convening the table where we'd love to invite all and every brand to sit, take a seat, and explore what responsibility looks like and where the opportunity rests.
Brilliant. With us as well, maybe.
Yeah.
I think we've put a few minutes for audience questions.
That's a good question. In beauty, we're seeing energy come through a lot now, and I wondered how we've also seen it sort of stress the effect on its head in terms of, okay, let's change the idea of being stressful to how do you find the joy. And I wonder whether you've seen energy playing out in any of your areas of expertise.
Can you explain what you mean by energy in that?
Yeah, energy almost is a metric, I think. So, flipping that on its head, how do you see that play out in terms of products or optimizing that?
So products that would be related to whether you've got low energy or high energy.
Yeah,
or,
and bringing that into kind of the brand.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I've got thoughts on
I'm
that.
thinking you go on.
I mean, I certainly see. I mean, we're looking a lot at kind of life stage changes, or whether it's menopause or any of those things. I think it's some of those imperceptible changes that I'm particularly interested in at the moment, because as we've seen, and I was at a talk recently where Alex Gourlay, who's the CEO of Barrett, was talking about all this kind of data that we have. But I think some of these things, these biomarkers, tech can be really useful for these sorts of things, just to say, actually, I've got this energy shift, I don't really know why. Being able to plug into those things and say, actually, it might be to do with your hormones, it might be because you're suffering from burnout, it might be because you've got unusual levels of stress that we can measure by using, various different sort of cognitive biomarkers to support you. I think it's those sorts of customization, if you like, around your energy levels is really useful, because I think it's phenomenal how many people don't know why they're feeling like they're feeling, or it's wrong by feeling it. I don't want to get too much into sort of perimenopausal territory at the moment. Don't want to make it about me. But I think there are certainly lots of things where people in all kinds of stages of life, young, old, are experiencing those things where that's why the Initio thing was really interesting, because it was actually saying very specifically, this is data on you, some of it you'll recognise, some of it might be quite imperceptible and it's kind of quite amazing self-knowledge, but then this is something to support that, so you get that sort of direct line, which is very positive. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, and I think also the energy being wrapped up in that bigger picture around the impact of burnout and wellness burnout, now that you're interrelated, it's interesting.
Especially when I think, when we're looking a lot at the moment as well as sort of life stages and that idea of, the 100-year life and the extension of life, and that is changing things quite a lot, because that perception we used to have, these are things that are marketed for pensioners or blah, blah, blah. But actually, of course, we're seeing people are shifting into these different gears, pivoting into second careers, having children later. All these things are having quite a big impact as well on health and well-being and energy levels and those sorts of things. So with that, I don't know if that would resonate with you, Owen.
Yeah, what I started thinking about, and I'm not a neuroscience expert, but my understanding is that task switching takes up a lot of energy. And of course what these devices do is enable insane task switching, like you were saying, reading a report and then you're checking LinkedIn and blah, 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 blah. And you feel like you're doing a million things at once and then it's exhausting. I really notice just anecdotal, but when I sort of plan my day, this next hour I'm working on this next hour I'm working on this next 15 minutes I'm replying to WhatsApp. Actually, the energy level stays way more consistent because there's more of just a script to run off rather than having to use that executive functioning to constantly be deciding, okay, this, sort of like reducing decision fatigue. So the decisions are always made once at the start of the day, and then it's just running up tasks. And I mean, that makes me think about rituals as well. And again, the sort of the power of a ritual where you really craft out that time, which could be a makeup routine, like up to the next, I don't know how long it takes to do makeup, maybe it's 2 hours, depending who you are. It takes me 5 seconds. But I'm doing nothing else, no podcasts, even no music, just me, the mirror, the brush.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Apparently we switch activity every 42 seconds. That's why it's so exhausting.
Wow.
Do you just have any 42 seconds?
Every 42 seconds. Frankly, I'm surprised you're still here.
I'm not. I'm in the next meeting.
I think that the one thing that has struck me is how having fun with this is a huge opportunity. You know, because there's so much weirdness in this current moment. I mean, as we said, Heineken and Cola already done this very well. But that whole walnuting thing is surreal. Like kids filming themselves doing nothing. It's a big thing on planes now, apparently, not to log on and just sit there and do nothing.
It's like a radical act of resistance.
Exactly.
Doing nothing,
It's this digital defiance, and I think there's a huge, because brands have that power to shift culture, right? If they can embrace this and play with it, you know, bring on board their, you know, celebrity ambassadors and really push out this slightly tongue-in-cheek messaging.
This is something that we were talking about a lot, isn't it? That I think that this idea that we constantly hear brands kind of saying, but I have to be in these places because these are where our audiences play, particularly when they're talking about Gen Alpha. But perhaps not really realising that there is that idea, you know, the Harris poll, we're talking about it as the desire for hands-on happiness for young people. And so that's an inflection point, which is an inflection point being driven by them. There was that amazing sibling study, as you said, where it was like siblings talking about, don't allow my younger brothers and sisters to have this technology until they're a certain age. But yeah, you know, leading to things like people sort of desperately queuing for these hour-long experiences and experiences where you can have your phone. So that whole scenario coming from that.
I went to last month Marina Abramovich's new exhibition in Manchester. Did anyone go to that? Really good. But so she had this huge warehouse in Manchester, Factory International, I think. Just something like 70 performers. And on the way in, you have to lock your phone in the thing, and it's no phones. And then I was thinking, all right, this is going to be the next 2 hours. And then she comes down, and she's 80 years old and magisterial and Botoxed up, but she looks fabulous. And she says, all right, you're going to be here for the next 4 hours. And you can leave the warehouse, but I advise you not to. And you might see things that will disturb you. Stay with it. Enjoy. And it was fantastic. It was so good. And to actually have said, again, setting that frame of, you're not going to have your phone for the next 4 hours, and you're going to see some crazy shit. And don't walk out. Don't cry. Don't complain.
But you know what it is, I think part of this is connected. So I'm doing a bit of research, quite a lot of research to do this arts and entertainment industry at the moment, to do this sort of staging and scenography. And there's lots of discussion about the huge desire for kind of unmediated experience. And the unmediated experience, partly it's proximity, partly it's being in the room with other people and having that visceral connection, and partly it's having the unmediated experience to the art or the art form or the artist, which is even why actually we've got it in a report on the site. We're talking a lot about listening rooms and sonic ateliers. So like Valentino, for instance, over the summer had a listening room installed, beautifully designed in the base room of their flagship. And the idea is that you would go down there and you would listen to an album as the artist had intended it. So rather than having this, you know, to your point, Imra, about every 42 seconds, that sort of kaleidoscopic shuffle culture, actually you would experience something if somebody else wanted to give it to you. And that felt like something thrillingly radical because it was about being taken on a journey. And it's that idea that actually with really great art and those sorts of experiences, and brand experiences can count for that as well. You need to kind of surrender to be taken on the experience, and that's where people have a really great time. Otherwise, you get these little minuscule nuggets of dopamine hits that you were talking about, Emma, and then you're on to the next, and it's not very satisfying. You used that phrase before. I love the phrase because sort of, and Annie talks about this as well a lot, about creating more nourishing diets with social media and technology, and I think that's where people have realised that they've got to, that they want something that more soul nourishing, perhaps.
I think a really good example, sorry, is the narrative and consuming something that I've experienced recently was with the Lily Allen album, where it was, it is an album to be listened to from beginning to end, and it's greater for that sort of journey. And I know it's not for everybody, but I thought that's the first time I experienced an album in that linear fashion as it was intended, rather than it being served up to me, carved up to me. And it was quite satisfying.
Yes, exactly. Satisfying is the right word, and I think even the kind of language and the language that we use in the way that we market things, I think talking about kind of nourishment and satisfaction alongside these sort of joy, I think those things are really important, because I think those are the kind of key buzzwords that people are looking for. So yeah, there's loads.
Do you think the definition and kind of what people are striving for of well-being is shifting? We talked a lot about how the contextual changes are, there's more barriers, but is that North Star of what people are trying to get to? Is that changing at all, or is that a constant?
Tessa, you might want to talk about this, possibly. I mean, I think definitely we talked about the idea of I think actually it's on, good living, the idea of good living. I did some work recently talking about sort of eco-communications particularly, but there was a really interesting piece of work done by the group Purpose Disruptors, who are an group of advertising executives, realised that they were kind of just fueling a lot of really negative consumption, and it was damaging all our planetary issues, climate crisis. And they did a huge survey that was like the 2030 survey with a whole load of other people sort of about good living, and it was really interesting when it was sort of surveying people, connecting to things like those statistics about our relationship with our work colleagues, our relationship to nature. So I think there is a situation where actually, probably if we polled this like 5 or 10 years ago, where people would have said this is the zenith of what a good life looks like, I think that's probably shifted quite dramatically. Would you think that's fair to say, Tess?
Yeah, I do. I think it's about the quality of life, and I think you guys kind of captured it already in that previous conversation about moving away from the sort of dopamine hits. But rather than just kind of longevity, we're always striving for longevity, live longer, look better in older age, all of that kind of stuff. And I think now is very much about having peace of mind, and I think the shift is very much about the time that you have being better. And I mean, all of these conversations that we've had today around kind of things like, living into it, the need for boredom, the need to be together, the connection. I mean, I think actually each of the stages that we went through in the presentation, which all speak to each other, because it's one big, continuous narrative, which is really just about in some more in-depth, slow-moving quality of life into everything that we're doing, and not just, to your point, around the jumping from one dopamine hit to another. We're not saying, don't perform, don't do sport. Performance culture is really important, of course, because people still want to be fit and healthy and look great and all of those things. But in doing it, it can't be that kind of aggressive activity that's just leading to a goal. It's got to be about and I think that's the point. It's not about tracking it and just going, I did that, I reached that target. It's about enjoying the process and in the process doing it with friends and things. I think it's really, it's ultimately quite wholesome. And I think Jess's point about going back to that kind of analog, reality, there's an old-fashionedness to it that we need to kind of embrace, because I think we're all, speaking of myself, but I feel like we're all getting so swept away with the tide that is AI and this feeling of a lack of control. And so I think a lot of well-being is about kind of getting that control back of our lives, of our moods, of our activities. And it's actually quite simple, but it's unpicking all of the unsimple stuff that's been sort of, done unto us. That we've chosen.
I think it's also quite personal as well, because it used to be, this is wellness, this is well-being, this is the state that you need to reach, and it isn't that anymore. It's actually much more related to who you are, what you want to do. What I'm finding incredibly interesting is that everything that we're talking about today is getting back to self, who you are. That's been taken away from us because of the doom scroll, because of the constant dopamine hits. So it's almost giving permission to do just one thing, nothing, and connect back with self. So
It's connection, isn't it? Because we've been intermediated, and we're allowing ourselves to be intermediated for the purpose of convenience.
Yeah.
But if you go too far down that line, you may find that you can't really go back. I think that's one of the things that we've looked at a lot with AI.
I also think, I think for self, I absolutely agree with that. I think we're also discovering the imperative that our wellness is connected to the wellness of the planet as we see the planet getting more and more unwell. So we wrote in this macro about ecosomatics, but I've been looking at some elemental wellness and how does the planet's health affect our own. And there's this lovely concert series on at the Barbican currently called Fragile Earth, Sounds of a Living Planet, which is designed to reconnect us to the health of the planet. And there's lovely things like there's a choir that's singing like waves of the sea to help you connect with the ocean. They've done electronic versions of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. There are field recordings that create these sort of immersive day-long concerts around birdsong. And I think understanding the connections between we've individualised well-being to such an extent, but we have lost potentially something in our planetary health as well. And so opening that up not only can affect and improve our well-being, might also be the tripwire we need with climate apathy to reconnect with the planet's health, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're doing some more work on that at the moment in our EcoCon series, where we're specifically looking at nature also as a sort of catalyst for greater creativity, which is a useful sell for it. So rather at the moment people just talk about it as respite and kind of dipping out, as if it's just literally there to just kind of be the place that you purely escape to. But what if actually you think about it is the place where you not only escape to, but it's the place that's going to galvanise something deeper and more exciting in you. What if that could be the route to you sort of fulfilling who you are creatively, potentially? I'm just mentioning that because it's one route, but I think the eco aspect is really important, yeah.
Well-being and brands, obviously well-being is such a personalized experience. What do you think, works best to kind of, base the offering on the kind of more personalized, or actually have some simple solution that will kind of people will discover and fit within their own routine? So kind of one simple solution but fits all, and loads of personalized experiences.
Do you have a particular products that you rely
I mean, anything. It's kind of the conundrum of whether you go kind of precise and for each different mood, or you're just like, here we go, please I don't know, a cup.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I mean, I think, depending whether it's a brand that's very sort of got a very sturdy tech background or not, I think the personalisation aspect is really useful, but it could be about having a tiered process. Whereas you have a brand where essentially will be better for people if you have this particular drink or this food that's maybe featuring particular nutrients that you'll know will benefit you. But then also it might be that you also have another aspect of that if you want to go higher and you want to have a subscription to something, you can get more detail and can make it all personalised. So I think really I give different advice depending on whether it was fragrance or food or beauty or fitness, but I think tiering, there's infinite possibilities with that from my perspective. Because it's like you said, I mean, Owen, you were like, you can spray and that will change the ambience in the room and that will create benefit, but you can go higher and you can have much more sort of in-depth analysis of your own self.
It's such an interesting debate, and what comes to mind is, when you go to a restaurant, you get a bit of a personalised experience, but it's not super personalised. And actually, some of the top restaurants, there's one or two things on the menu maximum, right? Someone's just going, we're going to deliver this and we're going to deliver it really well. And you go, great, I'll happily pay for that. So, personalisation, I think, zooming back on this biometrics thing, there is sort of, there's lots of potential in the personalisation space. I don't think the problem has been cracked yet at all. Really, I think often, and we've seen this with others over the journey, is that we sort of tried to give people too much freedom and they just didn't get it. So then it became, how do we actually streamline this so that you pick it up and you go, I click this for relax playlist, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that specificity is really useful. Yeah, some people will just, as you said, you just simplified it, and people won't know the names of the artists they want and things like that. But there will be other instances where I think, you know, if you're in sport, I mean, we're doing a lot of work around how recovery, for instance, in running culture, it used to always be about the track and the performance, and now actually recovery is almost like a micro-sector in itself. So that will be very different for very different people, different stages of your life, whether it's to do with age or life situation or any of these things. I think there are infinite amount of things that can affect your, you know, psychophysical well-being. And if you could tailor that, I think there's a lot to be said for that. But other things are very simple and make a big difference too.
Question
Okay, we've got one more.
I have a question exactly about what you said before, so how the environment and well-being go together. Do you think that in the future, sustainability will take into consideration human well-being as well as the planet well-being? Because of course, human emotional well-being and mental health are as important as our environment health, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two have been separate for too long, and they're deeply connected. But I also think part of our, you know, sort of our well-being is not just feeling good all the time. Sometimes it's confronting what we need to confront and our responsibility as well, so we can feel like we're doing good in the world. And I think part of well-being will be taking care of the planet. So taking responsibility for the planet is part of the well-being project, I'd say.
Yeah, it was more about company responsibility in terms of regulation that are driving sustainability right now.
Possibly, and you would hope that it would be linked. So you would say, well, actually, you know, human well-being will go down if sustainability from a climate perspective isn't sorted out.
Exactly, and not just for the employees, but for the consumers. So especially towards the consumer, not to harm their emotional well-being, mental health.
On that point, from a brand perspective, I will shut up now. It's worth having a look. There's a really interesting designer called Louisa Gray who does a circular sanitogenic design, which is, she works, sometimes actually she does stuff in the NHS, but she also does kind of very expensive private residential houses. She's just done the gym, the method in Westbourne Grove. That's really interesting because she looks specifically at this idea that everything to do with your circadian rhythms, everything you touch, the air that you breathe, every material that you come into contact with will affect human health, because most things at the moment, spaces are designed to kind of not amplify bad health, but they're kind of space neutral. So we're talking about the idea of kind of health positive spaces as opposed to just health neutral spaces. So she is Louisa Gray, House of Gray, really interesting designer. We've got more on site we can send you to. I think that's well over time, but thank you so much for your amazing questions, and thank you for amazing panelists.